Hey guys, so this week's missionary is a woman named Betty Greene. She was born in 1920 in Seattle, Washington, and she grew up to become the first woman to fly in a lot of areas and one of the founders of one of the biggest aviation Christian groups out there, the Mission Aviation Fellowship. So like I said, she was born in 1920 and she grew up around the time of the great aviators like Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh. So when she was like a kid, she saw all these famous people doing all these cool flights around the time that airplanes started to get really popular. She loved flying so much that she used her birthday gifts and all of her free time saving money so she could take flight lessons. And she even did a solo flight when she's a teenager. And that love of flying continued on into her adulthood. She originally went to school to become a nurse because that was one of the best positions for an educated woman at the time. But it just didn't fit for her. So with her parents' permission, she started going into flying lessons for civilian flying. She actually got the advice from one of the women at her church when she was asking God, like, I don't want to be a nurse, I want to fly. And God answered her through the woman at her church. She said, why can't you combine your love of flying and your love for spreading the word of God? And around that time, World War II was starting, and they were in need of women to help test out airplanes. So she joined the Women's Air Force Service pilots, the WASPs. And they tested airplanes and like high altitudes and for letting the men practice shooting and targeting them. So their contributions really helped allow the men to go off and fight while they stayed home and did important testing. After the war was over, she felt that she wasn't done flying. So she put out a reach for other pilots who felt called to use their airplanes, which was still a fairly new thing at the time, to go and reach people in foreign nations. Because at that point, for missionaries to get from one point to another through some dark, deep jungle, it could take anywhere from 10 to 14 days, what an airplane could do in like an hour and a half. The 3 male pilots answered her call, and they said that they thought God had been calling them to do the same thing. And together, they made the Mission Aviation Fellowship, and she was the one to take the first flight. She took 2 translators for the Wycliffe translators, which were some of the missionaries from earlier this summer. They're the ones who make Bibles in all these different languages. So with Mission Aviation Fellowship, she flew over 4,800 hours and did around 4,600 flights. And she was the first woman and sometimes the first aviator to reach certain parts of the world. In fact, in a few countries, they had to pass laws to allow her to fly there. But they passed, and she was able to go and spread the gospel to hundreds of people. And not only that, but she brought medicine and food and supplies, not only bringing the gospel, but feeding their physical and spiritual needs at the same time. Eventually, she retired, but she continued working with them for many, many years. And today, the Mission Aviation Fellowship has over 130 aircraft and reaches people on the daily, spreading food, gospel, and medicine supplies, and many, many more necessary things to people all over the world. So even in a time when women didn't have the same rights we do today, and the technology wasn't as good, she made such a lasting impact that she founded the Mission Aviation Fellowship that's still doing so much service today in terms of spiritual and physical needs for people all over the globe. She's a real leader and a real person to look up to, for someone who led the way in so many different areas that almost seem unimaginable at her time. But she was real, and she was one of the many women in the Christian faith that paved the way for us today. Thank you guys for joining me today. And now, I think it's time for me to fly off too.